Journey, the exciting television series that brings you each week the actual films of colorful adventures in all parts of the world. The golden journeys of real people. Here to present tonight's journey is John Stevenson.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's true story, bold journey is high adventure at its very best. During the next 30 minutes, we'll join an actual expedition led by Colonel Nicholas Smith to find the highest waterfall on the face of the earth. And here are the facts. In 1937, while flying over a desolate, unexplored region in Venezuela known as Devil's Mountain, an American pilot by the name of Jimmy Angel discovered a waterfall with a sheer drop of 3,212 feet, 15 times greater than the drop of our own Niagara Falls. Well, Jimmy Angel's plane crashed on top of Devil's Mountain, and he walked out on foot. But he had discovered the #1 waterfall in the whole wide world. It's a sincere pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome tonight's distinguished guest who found and photographed for the first time the Angel Falls in Venezuela. He served during World War II with the OSS, more popularly known to all of us as the Cloak and Dagger Unit. And he is also the author of the wartime bestseller, Golden Doorway to Tibet. Let's meet Colonel Nicholas Smith. Colonel, welcome to our program.
I'm very happy to be here, John.
Colonel Smith, how do you account for the fact that the highest waterfall in the world wasn't discovered until 1937? Now, as far as scientists and explorers are concerned, I should think that'd be like, well, picking up tomorrow's newspaper and reading that somebody had discovered a mountain higher than Everest.
Actually, John, the world heard about this waterfall for the first time nearly 4 centuries ago, but it just couldn't believe that it was possible.
But to your knowledge, Colonel, do any other movies of Angel Falls exist?
Well, we made the first pictures from its base in 1950. We were the third expedition to reach the base, the first to film it. Of course, there had been pictures made from planes in the skies overhead, but never from the jungles at the foot of the falls before.
Oh, thank you, Colonel Smith. We look forward to seeing these movies. By car, by foot, and by dugout canoe, we join the expedition of Colonel Nicholas Smith in the search for Angel Falls.
John, when the conquistadors first went to what is now eastern Venezuela, they met squat, slant-eyed, Asiatic-appearing Indians called Tarapans that told them an extraordinary story, that in the far southeastern corner of the land there was a huge devil mountain called Auyán Tepui, and from the clouds above this mountain tumbled the highest waterfall to be found anywhere in the world. Well, 400 years ago, that sounded like an old wives' tale, but as we're going to see in our film journey, it's turned out to be the truth. As I saw my little 4-wheel drive truck being unloaded, I wondered that in the next few months we'd be able to reach the base of Angel Falls and make the first motion pictures ever taken of this scenic marvel from the base. We had brought with us 20,000 feet of film, canned food, everything that we would need on the long journey, and we'd send Indians 40 days overland from Ciudad Bolívar on the Orinoco to build an airfield for us, because only the first 2/3 of the journey could be made in the pickup truck.
Colonel Smith, excuse me, what did explorers do before the Jeep?
Well, before the Jeep, I guess they went mostly by boat or canoe or camelback, but we were fortunate to have it. Our first stop was going to be a few hours' drive to the strange and mysterious castle of Rancho Grande in the mountains towering above Lake Valencia. Now, some 30 years ago, it was the castle of one of the last great dictators of the world, Juan Vicente Gomez. It has, as you'll see in a moment, 120 rooms. And when word was brought to the 196 men who were constructing it that the dictator had died in bed, they refused to continue any longer with their labors. Dr. Beebe did a lot of his scientific work here in the years immediately following World War II. In 1950, it was turned then into a biological station by the government, and the government decided to place in charge of this station an extraordinary German explorer. This German explorer is credited with the discovery of Podrong, the pre-Brutus capital of Tibet before Lhasa was ever dreamt of. So we have come here to chat with Dr. Ernst Schaefer, the famed German explorer of Tibet. He has traveled extensively also in the interior of Venezuela, and there were many pointers which he could give us. He is one of the most interesting men, John, I've ever met.
I imagine, Colonel Smith, that this man was a valuable advisor to you in this area.
Yes, he was most helpful. So we spent several days here with him, getting all sorts of pertinent information. Then as we continued on our journey, we dropped down over the mountain to Turiamo Bay, where the late dictator used to keep his yacht moored as a constant avenue of escape. While building our camp at the edge of the beach, we had a surprise visit from two local distinguished visitors, the famous thousand-legged worms of Venezuela. Automatic transmission, fluid drive, and freewheeling.
Look at him navigate.
Have you ever seen anything like that, John? Well, thousand-legged worms of Venezuela taste like prussic acid. We found this out a moment later as we watched this hitchhiker moving up the limb of the tree toward our pet bird, Alberto Jose. Alberto Jose sensed that there was something unpleasant about the worms. He went as far as he could up the limb and then bit into the thousand-legged worm. To his horror, he found out that it did taste like prussic acid, fell off the lid of the stream, and it would have been swept out to sea if my friend, Art Hall, hadn't jumped into the stream and rescued him. Here he is. The where's John for his experience. It was one of the most unhappy little birds that you could find anywhere. Well, Alberto traveled everywhere with us over Venezuela, and I promised him a very good dinner that evening if he would promise me never to take a bite out of a thousand-legged worm. As we left the beach and continued up into the higher country, we had to make stops en route to fill up the water tank. We would get our water from springs and then would be sure to boil it. We didn't want to take any chance of finishing up with amoebic dysentery as we had 2 years earlier on our long caravan journey across western Tibet. Now, here in this section of Venezuela, we find a typical costume for a traveler. It doesn't wear an overcoat, but a blanket with a hole in the center for his head. It can be pretty nippy up in the mountains, as it's extremely warm in the jungles of the coastland and in the desert regions. We had to cross hundreds of miles of desert as we were moving on toward Ciudad Bolívar on the Orinoco. Here we run into a rather interesting Indian type. Now, John, I don't know if you know it or not, but the most savage Indians in all of South America are the Motilones. They still kill with the blowgun and the poison dart, and they live on the Colombian-Venezuelan border. This lady, we were told, was a distant cousin of those Indians. She wouldn't kill you with a blowgun or poison dart, but she'd remove all the contents of your wallet with the greatest of ease if given the opportunity. A short distance beyond her village, and we passed through the toy town of El Mahan. Everything here is on a toy scale, from the church to the houses. And what do we find here, John, but an Italian DP who is earning his living as a local good humor man.
Oh, no.
Now, education for school children is compulsory in Venezuela. There are 400,000 school children, and we found that these little boys were playing hooky from school. When we learned that they had their own boat, we couldn't say that we blame them. It's much more fun to go fishing than it is to go to school, whether you live in the United States or in Venezuela. The term Venezuela literally means Little Venice, and was given that name by the conquistadors centuries ago. In the Indian section of El Mahan, we find that the houses are all built on stilts, and we found only children and women here. Most of the able-bodied men were off in the oil fields, making from $6 to $14 a day. As you know, the oil fields of Venezuela are among the world's greatest, and she is experiencing a tremendous economic boom. These people could have easily afford modern bungalows, but they like their old-fashioned houses, though they do purchase station wagons from the United States. Their wives wear the sacco. These girls were waiting for a bus to appear, and while waiting for it, they've just had the Venezuelan equivalent of a hot dog, and she's dipped her fingers in a wash basin where the water hasn't been changed for over a week, but that doesn't disturb them in the slightest. If you wear the sacco, you don't have to worry about an expanding figure with the passage of time. It's a quaint costume which has been affected by the introduction of the Mother Hubbard. As we continue through the deserts, we stop at a water hole where we find hundreds of birds hitting the water, and a moment later, each and every one of them coming up with a silver fish in its mouth. There seems to be an inexhaustible supply of fish to these water holes. And here's a member of the heron family that we call traffic signal bird.
Oh, why is that, Colonel?
Well, can you see what he's doing there?
Oh, of course.
With his tail. As we were photographing them, we suddenly saw the vacuum cleaner bird come into the picture. At least that was the name that we gave to him. Well, the birds took fright. They flew off against the distant horizon, and as we looked up into the top of the tree nearby, we saw at an elevation of over 100 feet 3 members of the macaw family. These are among the most nervous birds to be found in the jungle. They never seem to be long in one vantage point, constantly moving on to a new one. And as we moved in for a close-up, a telephoto shot of one of the 3 macaws, we suddenly saw why he was so nervous. There, coming down the trail to finish up almost at our feet, was the most curious member of the jungle family. And the bird, even though he was at a great height, didn't feel that he was far enough away from him. I refer to none other than the iguana. Now, the iguana is extremely curious. He approached within a very few feet of us, as I mentioned a moment ago. We both knew that if you pick up an iguana by the tail, he'll go off lickety-split, leaving his tail in your hands, and will quickly grow another. And that is exactly what happened when my friend Art went over to grab him by the tail.
Amazing. Look at that.
Well, we're getting on now, John, towards Ciudad Bolívar on the Orinoco River, which is the gateway to the Gran Sabana and to the Lost World country, which was made famous by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in his famous book of the Lost World. As we mentioned at the start of the film this evening of our journey, we had sent Indians 40 days overland to build an airfield for us, and we're going to make the journey in an hour and a half by plane. But before taking off from the local airfield by plane, I wanted to visit a tiny 2-room house called Gibraltar. It's the home of Mrs. Sammy Fales, the wife of a well-known North American bush pilot, who is known throughout the length and breadth of the land as the Bird Lady. She can do anything with birds, and they're all crazy about her. The cockiest of all of them was this little fellow up under her golden curls. Well, we spent all too brief a time with Mrs. Fales and went out to the airfield where the plane was waiting. Now, it seemed fantastic to me that we were going to make a journey in an hour and a half that had taken our Indians 40 days to complete. And as we left the field, we were soon flying over the mysterious Caroni River, past the outpost of St. Helena, and as we flying over country, which only a few white men have seen.
Thank you, Colonel Smith. We'll see the successful conclusion of your search for Angel Falls in just a moment. We continue now with part 2 of the search for Angel Falls. And here once again is Colonel Nicholas Smith to describe the action.
And so, John, as we continue on to the south, we're passing on occasion over land that only a few white men have seen, and every once in a while across land that no white man has ever visited. As we get closer and closer to the great devil mountain of Auyán Tepui, we know that there are 2 reasons why 295 of the 300 square mile surface area has never been explored. The first reason is that for centuries, the Indian medicine men have told the Indians that to visit the top of it means death. A taboo has been placed upon it. And the second reason you're going to see now when we go up on to the top of the mountain, and that's a much more important reason. Here is the 300 square mile surface area of the top of this great plateau, the sedimentary rocky mesa of Auyán Tepui. Every few yards there are gashes, 10, 20, 50, up to 100 feet in width, and sometimes thousands of feet in depth. And great, lonely stone sentinels guarding the approaches to this, one of the few frontiers that remain unknown in the mid-20th century to the white man.
That's some of the most rugged country I've ever seen, Colonel
Yes,
Smith.
some of the most rugged country exists anywhere. There's Jimmy Angel's plane. It crash-landed in 1937. It was in 1937 that daredevil pilot, Jimmy Angel, hunting for gold on the top of the mountain, crash-landed, and he's alive today. He got down off the side of the mountain with ropes. He had Indians in the neighborhood knowing that he could have trouble, and he was prepared for any eventuality. So, in 37, he found that the legend, as told 400 years ago by the Tarapan Indians to the conquistadors, was true, and that the world's highest waterfall does tumble from the top of this mountain. But though we were flying over the top of it, we had many days of travel to reach the base of the falls and to see the world's highest waterfall for ourselves. We've landed on the little field of Mayupa, the field which had been constructed by our Indians that we had sent overland from Ciudad Bolívar on the Orinoco River. And as our pilot, Captain Charlie Vaughan, landed the plane, he had trouble with the carburetor. If he can't repair it, John, it means a 40-day journey for us back by foot and canoe across this wild section of Venezuela to the Orinoco River.
I hope he knows his business.
He does know, John, exactly what he's doing. And he's had many a problem in the past. He's always been able to come out of it successfully. Sometimes, as he told me, it took only a few minutes and sometimes hours. Well, after 4 hours, he has everything working. You see the propellers turning and the Great Devil Mountain in the distance. And here are the Indians that are going to get us through to Angel Falls. First of all, we meet the 12-year-old son of our number one Indian. He could carry a 50-pound pack on his back. And here's one of the nephews of our number one Indian, Escrivan. You'll notice in the background the blowgun and the poison darts. Here is his assistant that lives downriver and has helped in the construction of the canoes, and then a 16-year-old nephew who collected strange insects as a hobby and who was very skillful in building houses. These houses had been constructed for the Indians as a permanent residence later and for our party while we were in Mayupa. They are covered with thatch and are so sturdily built that during the worst tropical downpour or hurricane, you can swing back and forth in your hammock as snug as a bug in a rug. Well, on the fourth day, John, at dawn, we were on our way. You see the Devil Mountain in the distance. We brought an outboard motor with us, and we were traveling in corriels, canoes, hollowed out of the logs of trees. Escrivan could pole and paddle us upstream when we didn't want to use the outboard or we were in too shallow water. People had laughed at us back in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. They'd said, whatever makes you think that you're going to see Angel Falls? For 360 out of 365 days of the year, the falls are hidden by clouds and mist. Well, we had a number of reasons that we thought we'd be successful. We were going to the end of the dry season, and we would be able to take advantage of the knowledge of these Indians who'd made the journey up almost to the base of the falls before us. We had plenty of food, and we could stay here until the last possible moment when the rains would start. Now, every few hours, there would be rapids, fast water. It would mean stripping down to our shorts, removing the contents of the canoes, carrying them up to still water beyond. But I enjoyed such a break, John, because it was hot there, traveling along through those great primeval jungles, and it was cool in the stream, and we didn't have to be afraid of the piri fish, the dread piranha, that are never more than 18 inches in length, and which are miniature sharks. These particular streams were free of the piri. Then we had reflection pictures of the Great Devil Mountain overhead. There it was towering above us, this mysterious, sedimentary, rocky mesa. It looked as if there were medieval castles up there on the top of it. Our Indians told us they knew it as a fact, though they hadn't been there, that there were strange, mysterious animals, three-legged animals with hoofs, all sorts of curious stories, but the top of it, of course, was as unknown to them as to us. Well, we built our base camp 3 miles away from the base of the falls. The first day, it was raining. We were busy cutting down shrubbery and trees. We wondered if we ever would see the falls. We didn't get a glimpse of them. On the second morning, we were back at 8 o'clock cutting down trees. At 9, the falls were still covered with mist and fog. And at 20 minutes to 11 on the second day, the mist parted, and here, John, the first motion pictures ever made of the world's highest waterfall. 3,212 feet, 15 times the height of Niagara. And you can see how right the Indians were when they said it tumbled out of the clouds above the Devil Mountain. It's fed by subterranean springs and drops from the very edge of the top of the precipice. Its mist is carried on an arc up to a half a mile distance, and it seems as it drops down for that tremendous height to almost disappear in midair.
Colonel, I could waste a lot of superlatives and never say enough. This is incredible.
It's just sort of from another world, the lost world of Conan Doyle. and then it comes together, it forms at the base into a stream and a second waterfall over 500 feet in height. It was really awe-inspiring to see it. The Explorers Club of New York, of which I'm a member, asked me to carry their flag since it was for the first time to the base of Angel Falls. And now let's fly over the top of this lost world, this mysterious, eerie land. And as we do so, John, just think of it, that here in the mid-50s of the 20th century, there can be something as extraordinary as this. 57, 58, and into the 60s, I'm sure it'll be, before man has conquered the top of that mountain and has been able to see all of the 295 square miles which remain unknown. Perhaps they will find prehistoric monsters living up there, just as Conan Doyle described them. Perhaps they won't, but it'll be a great adventure for someone to attempt. And as I had my last view of the Devil Mountain, I promised myself to take a try at it in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you very much, Colonel Smith, for an adventure that must certainly be a highlight among your many journeys around the world. Now, Colonel Smith, you mentioned during the film Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book, The Lost World, in which he used Devil's Mountain as the locale. Well, I'm not familiar with that book. I thought that perhaps you might tell us why he chose Devil's Mountain.
Well, John, it was a great bestseller many years ago, and the story is that he had traveled down to the Orinoco country to Ciudad Bolívar. There he encountered some Indians who told him the extraordinary legend about this mountain and that strange prehistoric animals lived up on the top of it. Our Indians claimed the same thing, but after all, none of them had been there, and as far as I know, no Indian has ever been to the top of the mountain.
Well, Colonel, I know that you've explored all of the continents and most of the land areas of our planet Earth. Which of these many regions do you think still remain, well, relatively unexplored?
John, the extraordinary thing about it is there's so many corners of the Earth's surface that remain unexplored. In 1937, we, for instance, were in the mountains of the Red Mist in the island of Hainan, an island of 14,000 square miles south of Formosa, and we only touched on that area. There are great stretches of the Wa headhunting country in southern Yunnan, again, that I've only skirted. That's in southernmost China, the Amnimach and Golak country of eastern Tibet, the great mountains bordering the Wakhan area of northeastern Afghanistan. Tremendous stretches in the central Amazon basin, and again, isolated spots in Africa and in Australia. They're just, well, there's enough exploration left for an awful lot of young men in this country over many, many years.
Well, Colonel Smith, I couldn't help noticing these, what is this?
Well, I've been edging them.
Sticks or something?
I've been edging them toward you. They're poison darts.
Oh, no.
You remember the little Indian family that you saw when we landed at Mayupa?
Yes.
We had sent them 40 days overland from Ciudad Bolívar on the Orinoco to build the airfield for us. They weren't very impressive looking as an Indian family, but as you know, they got us through to the base of the falls. They had a blowgun, a 9-foot blowgun in the background. I don't remember if you noticed it or not. Well, these are the arrows that they use in connection with it, and they're dipped in poison, which I was told is quite as effective as curare. And you know what curare will do.
Yes, I do. Well, thank you very much, Colonel Smith. We're certainly very grateful for your visit tonight with these historic films.
Thank you.
First ever taken from the base of Angel Falls.
That's right.
Again, Colonel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank all of you school teachers and educators for recommending our program to your students. We'll continue to present this fabulous world we live in as it really is. No Hollywood movies, no trick photography made in a Hollywood studio. Every foot of journey film that you see on this program is actually shot by our guests with their own 16mm cameras. John Stevenson saying thank you and good night.